If I had to use one word to describe Detention, I would call it a tragedy. A beautiful yet haunting story, Detention is a 2017 psychological horror game developed by Taiwanese studio Red Candle Games. While it did enjoy a fair bit of time in the limelight of YouTube Let's Plays around the time of its release, its relevancy has since faded and is now often regarded as a footnote in YouTube indie horror history. Most disappointingly is that there are no long-form video essays analyzing the whole thing, so today I intend to fill that gap in the market. Detention is one of my favorite games of all time, and for a long time I've wanted to do a full look at it, and today is finally that day. Set in 1960s Taiwan at the height of the White Terror and the implementation of martial law, Detention follows high school student Fang Rei Shin on a journey through a warped version of her subconscious that forces her to face the consequences of her actions. It's an absolutely beautiful experience, with a gorgeous soundtrack, amazing atmosphere, a uniquely eerie yet beautiful art style, and a heartbreaking story that's a tale as old as time, told in a unique way that pulls from the culture of Taiwan and the developers Red Candle Games. As usual, I'll be going through the game from start to end and highlighting the things I want to talk about as they come up. This game is packed with things to talk about, and I want to give it its due diligence. Needless to say, there will be spoilers, and I implore you to check out the game yourself. It's fairly inexpensive, and it's on most platforms, and it's pretty short. I'd highly recommend you play it yourself and coming back to this video when you're done. You will not regret it. Without further ado, let's talk about Detention. Sorry, I lied. This game deals with a lot of pretty loaded subjects, so I'm also going to put a content warning in here. CW for generally spooky imagery, torture imagery, domestic abuse, predatory relationships, and imagery of suicide. Now let's actually start. Our story begins in a quiet high school day in Taiwan. We see a man known as Instructor Bai enter the classroom and ask the teacher, Miss Yin, to step out. A dialogue prompt then appears on screen. Miss Yin, have you seen this list before? Flash forward to later that day. Our character Wei has fallen asleep in class and wakes up to find that everyone is gone and it is pouring rain outside. Before leaving, you can find a note that students were passing around asking where Miss Yin's been lately. How peculiar. Wei then sets off to leave. The atmosphere in this section, as in the rest of the game, is fantastic. It perfectly captures the eeriness of school after dark, and the ambiance provides a feeling that something is just a little off. Throughout the school you can find collectibles that help build the theme of the game. Among them are an illustration of the banyan tree in the schoolyard and a picture of a man with the quote, "The roots below the earth claim no reward for making the branches fruitful." The banyan tree is the tree that Buddha meditated under for 7 years, and it also symbolizes eternity. Put a pin in this, it will be relevant later. Furthermore, these collectibles also give us an understanding of the setting. Wei notes that one teacher's classroom belongs to a former war veteran who students refer to by his military title. He remarks that there's a literature competition that's only to stimulate patriotism, and, perhaps most notably, you can find a notice that instructs all students to notify the school if they suspect someone of communist activity. This paints a pretty clear picture of what happened to Miss Yin in the intro. I love this kind of environmental storytelling. It gives us a fairly straightforward understanding of what's going on without outright stating it. The game respects the player without making it too arbitrary. After leaving the main building, Wei makes his way to the gym, where he finds a girl sleeping on the stage. This girl is Fang Rei Shin. She seems just as confused as Wei as to why she's there, and then notices that she's missing her pendant, which is in the shape of a jade deer. In Chinese culture, jade is considered one of the most precious gems. Again, put a pin in that. Wei finds her necklace in a vent and fishes it out, giving it back to Rei. He also remarks that it seems like someone threw it in there, Rei adding that it's strange. I'm not entirely sure on what this means, but given what we learn later, it could be possible Rei threw the pendant in there herself out of shame of what it represented. The two of them head down to the river to leave the school, only to find that the bridge is broken and the river is blood red. I find it worth noting that in Asian mythology, spirits cannot cross the river, known as the river Sanzu in Japan. This will be mentioned by name later. Wei rationalizes it by saying that it could be factories upstream dumping waste into the water. The two of them decide to go back inside and wait out the storm for tonight. Rei introduces herself officially and gives us more insight into our setting. The Afro-Scene Instructor Bai served in what's referred to as just the war. Furthermore, she adds that Instructor Bai was apparently a ruthless killer in the war, and he's also highly paranoid of communist collusion among the students. Time for a brief history lesson. After the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1911, China became the Republic of China and fell into a power vacuum. The leaders of the Republic turned to the Soviet Union for help, creating a rift in Chinese leadership, one side preferring communism and the other preferring nationalism. This tension developed into a full-blown war, and eventually the nation split. The communists took over mainland China, and the nationalists fled to Taiwan. To this day, relations between Taiwan and mainland China remain highly strained. That's a very oversimplified version of events, and the China-Taiwan conflict is super interesting, and I'd highly recommend doing some further research if that piqued your interest at all. But what's important for the sake of the story Detention is trying to tell is that following these events came the White Terror of Taiwan. wherein anyone suspected of committing anti-state activities, read being a communist, would be arrested and deported to internment camps. An estimated 140,000 Taiwanese citizens were imprisoned, and up to 4,000 were executed. And that is where detention leaves us. After some more banter, Wei has the idea to use the phone in the principal's office to try and call for help as well as grab some supplies from downstairs. Wei leaves to get the stuff. However, as he does, the school's appearance withers away into a dilapidated and withered version. Text then appears on the screen. His footsteps echoed softly, invoking a trace of suspense in me. Reality faded as time stood still. I swallowed hard as the emptiness confined me. We're then treated to a lovely cutscene featuring some very disturbing prison imagery. Normally I would find this a little ham-fisted, but I think it works here because 1, the art style lends itself to this style of cutscene, so it doesn't feel as forced as other hyper-realistic, scary moments in horror games. And 2, the way it's portrayed is uniquely disturbing, to me at least. I mentioned this in my sister location video too, but something about spastic, twitchy movements like this really freaked me out. It's a really disturbing way to portray pain, and I think that it's not utilized enough. I think the thing that really makes this cutscene so disturbing, though, is that this was real for 140,000 people. No, of course the events of Detention specifically didn't actually happen, but the White Terror was a very real thing, and events similar to the ones that unfold in the game absolutely happened. Rei then wakes up in the auditorium in front of the stage. Above her, Wei is unconscious and suspended, and the auditorium is lit with eerie red ritual candles. In the supply closet, where Rei's pendant was located before, you can instead find a dead rat and a note that a teacher has started a book club for reading forbidden material. Again, put a pin in that. Rei grabs a candle to guide her through the darkness, and along the path outside she finds an unmarked grave and a shrine containing instructions on how to deal with the Lingered, and a key out of the auditorium. The Lingered and Detention are a fairly ubiquitous concept that appear across cultures all over the world, essentially the standard vengeful spirit who cannot pass on. No, not her. There are 2 possible interpretations of what these spirits represent, which I'll get back to later. The way by which you get past these spirits is holding your breath, which is a mechanic idea more games should utilize. For me, holding your breath is a very stressful experience, so it makes it all the worse when being able to hold my breath for a while is a matter of life and death. This mechanic is also based in East Asian folklore that states you can play dead by holding your breath in front of a zhangxi, the Chinese equivalent to a zombie. Also, a brief aside, since I couldn't find a better place to put this, if you die, you'll be put on this hill with an old woman, who will impart a pearl of wisdom such as, "The young depart as the old follow, leaving us this empty world." If you're wondering why she speaks in such a stilted way, that's actually to reflect the original version of the dialogue. In the original version, the old lady speaks Taiwanese as opposed to Mandarin, so to convey this distinction for the English version of the game, her dialogue was written in a more poetic way. This old lady also bears a symbolic resemblance to Meng Po, the goddess of forgetfulness in Chinese mythology who helps spirits forget their past lives so they can reincarnate without the burdens of their past lives. This explains how Rei's progress is reset whenever she dies. I'm such a sucker for games that have in-universe explanations of standard game mechanics like dying and respawning, and to see it implemented in a way that also makes use of the culture is just like, mwah, chef's kiss. But I digress. After this, you can progress to the main school, and if it was eerie before, it's downright scary now. While the Lingered aren't super abundant, with there being about 1 per story, the lack of enemies is easily made up for by the fantastic atmosphere. The art direction for this game is great, blending this really beautiful art with more realistic imagery. In addition, the detailing on the environments is perfect. Take the bathroom, for example. It's lit in a dank, greenish yellow and completely covered in a disgusting layer of grime. You can practically smell it through the screen if you go to the bathroom at a high school. The environments really pop out and feel super vivid. Another thing that greatly contributes to the atmosphere is the sound design. There's this awful ambient noise playing the whole time. I really want to describe as shuddering for some reason, but I think rattling would probably be a better fit. It sounds almost like a flag flapping violently in the wind. Regardless of what you want to call it, I find it deeply disturbing and it makes it hard for me to play this game at night. In addition, all the sound effects are also great, with everything feeling so viscerally uncomfortable when you do it, like you're gonna disturb some monster hiding in a shadowy corner when you open the creaky door to the gymnasium. And even though I said there aren't a ton of enemy encounters here, all of the ones that there are very effective. The Lingered are really creepy enemies. They unleash these unnatural creaking giggles and breaths, and their bodies contort in erratic and cringe-inducing ways, which evokes more torture imagery. They lurk in the shadows on each level and come lurching out of the darkness, spastically flying towards you with their disturbing movements. But let's get back to the main story. Rei hears the phone in the principal's office ringing and picks it up, requesting help as soon as possible. She's then given the ominous instruction to go to the counselor's office, locked behind a gate on the 3rd floor. This is foreshadowing for a major part of the story later. You're then set on a long chain of puzzles to open the gate locking the set of stairs on the other side of the school. The quest begins in the nurse's office, where you can find a report showing violent lacerations on a student's body. This, along with Ray's former remark that almost every faculty member seems to be a former military member, establishes this chapter's theme of violence and abuse and power. After using a food offering to lure a lingered away, you acquire a can of paint thinner and go back downstairs to thin the paint on a door marked with a talisman. I find it interesting that 1. Ray is defiling this space marked by divinity and sanctity, and 2. Inside of said space we see a utility knife repeatedly stabbed into a table, again showing our theme of violence, and a secret gambling area, which Ray says is prohibited at the school, showing our theme of abuse of power. In this room you can toss a set of die that can be found around the school which, when rolled, turned into teeth marked with the number 623. In Taoism, the Bagua are a set of 8 symbols which represent the fundamental principles of the universe, with each number being assigned a set of characteristics. The numbers here will correspond to Ray's principles, which we'll learn later, and we'll also see 63 come up again, so put a pin in that. After this, you can then take the bowl used to toss the dice into, and when you go back into the office, you can find an illustration of a throat-cutting ritual. It's pretty clear what you need to do here. Detention has a lot of moments like this where you're not directly instructed on what to do, but the implication is fairly straightforward, making it all the more dreadful. Next is one of the most iconic scenes of the game, cutting Way's throat. I find it interesting that Way is already dead when Ray slashes his throat, which I'll get back to later. Anyway, this section is highly visceral. You have to scroll up manually, stick the knife into his neck, and then drag the mouse across the screen yourself to collect his blood. Everything about it is designed to make it feel so deliberate and gruesome and really drive the knife in, no pun intended, that you're doing this. After collecting the blood, you can then use it to make an imprint of the etchings on Wei's desk in Miss Yin's classroom. The print made is of a translation of these ancient Taoist numerals, and hey, wouldn't you know, these are the same numerals as used on the Bagua. Combining this with the code given by the teeth die, you can now unlock the gate and access the counselor's office. When you get there, however, this monstrosity appears and begins chasing Ray down the hall. I don't know if it's just me, but when you're caught by this thing, I can see a military cap, and I've seen it suggested that this thing is a representation of Instructor Bai. Someone also said that he's carrying a bag of heads, which would represent all the people he killed in the war. I don't know, I don't see it, but it might just be me. After an intense chase sequence, Ray escapes into a room with Buddha's name scrawled across the walls and a single table in the center. Upon it, Ray's counseling records. The notes tell us that Ray is, or at least was, a troublesome student, consistently showing up late to class and generally treating school with a flippant attitude. After putting the notebook back down, you flash to Ray's bedroom in the middle of the night, with her groggy-eyed and pajamaed and accompanied by the muffled sounds of shouting. Upon observing the door, Ray notes that they're fighting again, and that she'll never get used to it. Besides that, in this room you can also find a waste paper basket containing a picture with a hopeful message on it, Ray saying that she thinks her mother threw it away. This, along with the argument going on outside and Ray's concern that she'll become like her mother, gives us an idea of the type of person Mrs. Fang is. Again, the subtle storytelling is genius. We never get to actually meet Ray's mom, but through environmental details like these, we can get a pretty clear picture of who she is. This informs our understanding of Ray's thoughts looking at her reflection here, where she's concerned about what she's going to do with her life and fears of becoming like her mother, an all too common anxiety for those of us around her age, and a bitter irony considering what we'll see later. Ray goes back to bed as Chapter 1 ends with her musing, "If a paper plane could whisk my dreams away from here, or I could wake up and find myself in a foreign land, oh how wonderful that'd be." Thus ends Chapter 1, a fantastic start. This chapter sets up a great atmosphere and just enough intrigue to give you an idea of what's going on while also encouraging you to continue. Chapter 2 begins with Ray waking up in front of the command post outside in the field, surrounded by a rainstorm of paper airplanes? If you go to the left, Ray will note that the Blood Red River has expanded into an ocean. Going to the right, meanwhile, takes you to the first major area of the chapter. The atmosphere of this chapter is less scary and intense, and more suspenseful and eerie, which adds to this chapter's theme of watchfulness, introduced by Ray's previous remark that she felt like she had no privacy in her home. In this area there are 2 collectibles of note that can be found. One is an instruction on how to avoid the Lantern Spectre, this chapter's enemy type. The Lantern Spectres are spirits from the underworld whose duty it is to wrangle lingered spirits and take them to the afterlife. The most notorious of these are the Heibai Wuchang, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, the Ghosts of Impermanence, and the second major collectible here. These spirits are the messengers of death and wield a feathered fan and token respectively, and these items will be the key to opening the gate. The first thing to do is retrieve a set of incense sticks from the media room, which is overgrown with shrubbery and grass and playing a slideshow of these creepy faces. On the blackboard, the word Snitcher is written repeatedly. In the center of the room is an unmarked grave with an incense holder in front of it. Upon taking the incense, Wei's name inscribes itself onto the tomb. You then proceed to the basement, full of prison cells containing figures with bags on their head, one of whom has a token on their back. There's also a small ritual area here. You can place the incense into the burner, to which Ray says, "Incense in hand, I do as Mom would and pray for a way to live as myself." This gives us more great insight into what Ray's life is like. Taiwan under martial law is a reflection of Ray's home life. She feels like she has no privacy, and she's caught between the bickering of the two parties. So, though she resents her, she follows in her mother's footsteps. After lighting the incense, one of the cells opens, giving you access to the token. Deeper into this creepy, dank basement is a wad of spirit money, at the very end of the tunnel next to a locked door. On the walk back, though, something has been decidedly disturbed. Another cell is open, and the prisoner is now upright, spastically twitching in a way not too dissimilar to the lingered. In addition, the previously open gate is swinging back and forth and hitting the side repeatedly, making an incessant clanging. The anxiety of this part is perfectly captured. We've all been spooked by noises that aren't actually anything before, but this time, you know there's something to fear. Seemingly innocuous details like the cell's gate clanging and the rope hitting the flagpole outside become extra terrifying when there is a real danger there. You must then burn the spirit money in this furnace inside the puppetry club, which is as creepy as it sounds. Puppets are a major motif in this chapter, and that is because puppet shows are, or at least were, I'm not entirely sure, a major part of Taiwanese pop culture. However, in the 1950s, martial law also took this facet of culture and used it as a way to promote nationalism. Again, we have the martial law imagery reinforcing our theme. But I digress. Upon burning the spirit money, an important step of the Taoist prayer ritual which has rigid instructions to follow, you are then given the fan, which means you can now open the door guarded by the Hai Bai Wuchang, and I don't think it's a coincidence that we see this ominous animation for a gate guarded by the messengers of death, followed by a chill air blowing inward. Stepping outside, you can find a statue of the president, which Ray says can be seen from practically anywhere on the campus. Again, there's our theme. Continuing forward, you can then enter the office building, and in the office, find the key to the roof of the Red House, the former building. Going to the roof shows you a brief flash of another Ray running forward, and then another flash of her falling from the rooftop, a tragic foreshadowing of what's eventually confirmed. Also appears a film reel for the projector, which plays a video of a series of numbers that can be used on the telephone in the office. Just a small note here, you can dial 911 on this phone and get the achievement, "What made you think this would work?" To which I say, well played, game. Anyway, picking up the receiver and calling the number from the film will confer a message reading, "Miss Fang, your country thanks you for your service." A loud crash is then heard as the monster that chased Ray down the hall before it charges past outside, Ray fearfully cowering in the corner. Once it passes, you can then go outside and find a puppet of a military officer. Going back to the courtyard, you can go to an area featuring the aforementioned banyan tree and a puppet theater, with two hands on either side and a puppet hanging in the center. Where have we seen a scene like this before? If you progress further, you can find a cassette tape nestled into the banyan tree trunk. This can be used in the 8-track tape player to hear the melody you must play on the piano in the music room. Aside from that, there are 3 other tracks on this tape, which I unfortunately cannot find translations for, and I definitely don't speak Chinese. This first one sounds like the national anthem of Taiwan from my limited research, but I couldn't find anything for the other 2. You must then play the piano melody, all of the keys for which are stained and battered, which to me is a literal interpretation of the idea that Ray has blood on her hands. The room is for a split second filled with audience members giving a round of applause, foreshadowing for one of the endings. I love this game's jump scares because they do a great job of putting you on edge the whole time. They set you up for what you think is going to be a jump scare, and then don't actually do it, and then once you're lured into a false sense of security, they'll catch you off guard when it happens a few moments later. It messes with your sense of rhythm. You can then access the puppet in the cage in the middle of the room, and upon taking it, you're treated to this lovely sight. We can now set up the puppet play. Upon putting them into position, the military puppet will turn and shoot the masked puppet, decapitating the one suspended in the middle in the process, and conferring a key to the basement of the Red House. Put a pin in this. You can now enter the basement. Upon entering, you are shown a flashback of a conversation between Ray and Wei. Wei gives Ray the list of forbidden books mentioned before, and the two of them briefly muse about Miss Yin. Wei compares the two of them, but Ray brushes him off, which will come back later. She then asks Wei if he knows what kind of relationship Miss Yin and the hereto unforeseen Mr. Chang have. Current Ray can then enter the room and pick up the book list, which is a gun. The description reads, "With proper use, I could use this unassuming reading list to practically destroy those in my way." As the OST shifts into a dreadful ambiance, the implication of what's about to happen is clear. Ray continues down a hallway of mirrors, and the next scene really speaks for itself. It's one of my favorite scenes in the game, and I couldn't do justice by trying to describe it, so I'm just going to let it play. what can I even say? From this, we have a clear understanding of what happened. Ray ratted out Miss Yin and the Forbidden Book Club to the Communist Police. With this in mind, we can unpin a lot of the stuff I mentioned earlier. The intro cutscene, the imagery of the dead rat, the repeated snitcher written on the blackboard, and from Miss Yin saying that he had to die, all the portrayals of Wei dying. The reason I believe it was relevant that Ray slashed Wei's throat when he was already dead was to convey that though he didn't kill himself, she certainly sealed his fate. I love all these little clues that ultimately culminate, because it gives the game so much replay value. Noticing little details like the dead rat on a second playthrough feel very rewarding and make you think about the rest of the game in a different way. Continuing on, Ray then enters the final area of this chapter, the Altar of Justice Cheng Huang, the god of justice often incited for wisdom. Ray states that while she always found her mother's prayers to be an inefficient use of energy, sometimes it really does feel like there's nowhere else to turn, again drawing parallels between Ray and her mother, whom she dreads becoming like. She then asks a series of questions, with which she casts a set of bua bue, again, I'm not sure of my pronunciation there, also known as divination blocks. These wedge-shaped pieces are a way to ask the gods questions. Two sides face up is the laughing answer, meaning unsure, two sides face down is the crying answer, meaning no, and both is divine answer, meaning yes. Basically, it's Taoist magic 8-ball. Ray asks 3 questions, about prospects, family, and love, which correspond with 623 on the Bagua. Respectively, the answers are Yang-po again, and Yin-po. Finally, Ray asks if she's too demanding of life, or if it's just her, and receives the divine answer. I love how this part is framed after the last scene, for a reason we'll get to later. We're then shown Ray's final thoughts as the chapter draws to a close. Youth is hardly ever given a chance, pushed through the grind until their innocence fades away. I've become a wooden horse on the carousel of life, a jumbled mess of lifeless emotion. Infused with frantic energy, I spin ever faster. End scene for Chapter 2 in the first act of the game. So now we know what Ray did, so now it's time to find out why she did it. The rest of the game becomes much more distinctly surreal from here on out, as we focus less on world building and lock in more closely on Ray as a character. The atmosphere of dread and anxiety gives way to the dream and melancholy world that Ray was living in. So without further ado, let's talk about Chapter 3. Ray starts this chapter placed in a dingy hallway with a locked door and a radio. You can tune this radio to take you to different eras of Ray's life. Each song reflects the moment in time that Ray is revisiting. These songs are all from the disc April Rain, a collection of widely known tunes that were popular during the Japanese occupation period and were later banned during martial law in Taiwan. I believe that to this day they're still pretty well known and listened to. This first one is called Bong Chung Hong, and I'll flash up the English translation to the lyrics on screen right now. This song tells the story of a young woman with an unrequited love, reflecting Ray's broken home life and later her herself. The next song is called Su Kui Ang, which, while I struggle to find an accurate translation for, I have surmised is a playful and flirtatious melody. This will become relevant later. Again, I just love details like this. It gives us a greater understanding of the time period while also indirectly telling us more about the characters. Allusions in media are one of my favorite things ever, and this game delivers fabulously. In the first tuning, Ray can exit her room and enter the dining room, where we get this cheerful scene of a dejected-looking woman burying her face in her hands, and a stoic man sitting across from her. Ray comments that her mother was always a traditional housewife and tended to take things sitting down, a trait she always disliked. In the next room is a ball featuring portraits of the Fangs with their eyes rubbed out. The lights in this room can be turned off, which reveal bloody clock hands on the faces of Mr. and Mrs. Fang, and a pair of watchful bloody eyes on Ray's. When observed, the eyes will drip tears into a glass below, which kind of reminds me of the imagery of Wei's blood-stained face in Chapter 1. Upon exiting back into the kitchen, the lights are off and Ray's parents are gone, and a fight between the two invisible parents is shown. While I suspect the choice to make the Fangs invisible here was a practical one, since animating their fight would probably be pretty laborious, it's also an interesting parallel to when we saw, or rather heard, them arguing earlier. Ray probably shut herself in her room and hid away when her parents would fight, so when she came out, all she would see was the debris. The invisible parents correspond with Ray only hearing and not seeing the argument earlier. Retuning the radio will flip Ray's room upside down, and the piggy bank that can be found in the previous station is shattered, which Ray notes is broken up for one's desires. Leaving the room will now take you to a dingy hall with a series of doors, and an invisible pair of feet will continuously create a trail of faint prints before petering out. Illuminating the puddle that they originate from with the juice cup, however, allows you to see them to the end of their path, and following them all the way through each door they enter will allow you to go into this hallway with syringes dangling from the ceiling, possibly conveying that Ray's father would take drugs. Inside the first door in this corridor, next to which is an ad for a PI firm that specializes in tracking people, is Ray's parents' bedroom. We're shown another cold scene between Ray's parents ambivalently laying in bed with each other. Upon observation, Ray says that she used to be able to hear her parents chatting with each other through the walls, before her father started coming home only when he was wasted. During these episodes, Mrs. Fang would huddle in a corner in fear, another habit Ray shares with her mother. In the next room is a set of clocks corresponding to the portraits in the dining room. Upon setting them so they match, the central clock, the one that corresponds with Ray, fills with blood. I'm not entirely sure if the times chosen have any significance, and I couldn't think of any, but since every detail in this game is specifically designed, you could probably come up with an interpretation. Ray's father is set at 6:45 and her mother is 1. If you have any ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Re-entering the bedroom, the scene has now changed to this scene, with pink and red lighting smattering the room and a set of lingerie replacing where Mrs. Fang was. Yeah, remember how I said Sui Kui Ong had a romantic undertone? This is why. Ray will say that one night her dad stumbled home drunk and collapsed onto the ground. She came over to help him and caught the scent of powdered makeup on him. Upon leaving, the playful melody of Sui Kui Ong is now replaced by the ominous ringing of tower bells. You can now return to the dining room scene and enter the locked door, which takes you to a scene of a serene and ethereal forest. Ray then encounters a glowing figure in a riverboat, invoking more river imagery. The scene fades away into a teacher's office, and we then see a conversation between Ray and the counselor, Mr. Chang. He compares her to the white daffodil, a symbol that's present in a planter in Chapter 1. He then invites her to a weekend out to teach her about the culture of Taiwan before martial law, which should immediately raise a bunch of red flags, you creep. You can then return to the kitchen where you can find a note for a new radio station tuning option. This station plays the song, bear with me here because I'm probably gonna horribly butcher this pronunciation, Gawat Ya Chu. I don't think that was right at all. That song is a melancholy tune about heartbreak. This tuning will take you to a dark room of glowing mirrors. I find it worth mentioning the mirror motif at this point since it's appeared 3 times, in this jump scare, the Miss Yin scene, and this radio tuning. Perhaps this motif symbolizes that Ray needs to reflect on her actions, since in the jump scare the dialogue says that she's afraid to remember, and in the Miss Yin scene the mirrors shatter after Ray's reflection shoots the hooded figure, and in this scene the reflection walks in the opposite direction of Ray. The shattered mirrors illustrate that she's not accepting what she's done and facing herself. Solving the puzzle, which requires Ray and the shadowy figure to move alongside each other, allows you to enter her father's study, where you can find a coin tucked into a shirt pocket. Depositing this coin to the piggy bank in the past and traveling back to the future causes it to turn into a ticket for a film. Returning to the study will now transform it into a glowing neon boulevard, decorated with traditional Taiwanese staple food and iconography that you'd often associate with the bustling urban centers of East Asia. One such symbol is the goldfish, which represents happiness and freedom in Buddhism. Ray can then view the film, which I'll let speak for itself. Yeah, needless to say, that's all sorts of bad news. You then receive the deer pendant again. Remember how I said jade is very highly valued in Chinese culture? That's why. You can return to the kitchen, where upon entrance a shadowy figure will hush Ray before disappearing. You then are shown that the room has been ransacked, and there's a search warrant lying in the middle of the room. Apparently, Ray's father was involved in a bribery scheme and was arrested, to which her mother had to say, "Dad got his hands dirty, but he'll live," which Ray felt she said with a concealed smile. From this, it's not hard to see where Ray got the idea to tattle to the communist police. That's what all the comparisons between her and her mother were for. What do you do with an unfaithful man? You rat him out to the police. You can also collect an assignment book, the description for which says is, "a reasonable excuse to enter the counseling office." You can return to the tuning in which Ray discovers her father's infidelity, which, recall, plays a flirtatious melody. You can now go to the end of the hall, which has become a ghostly forest. This juxtaposes the ethereal pink and blue forest from the first time Ray meets Mr. Chang. There are also goldfish skeletons in the background, which symbolize fading joy. If you give this scratchy silhouette of Mr. Chang the assignment book, the forest will once again fade away as the office takes shape. Mr. Chang tells Ray that the counseling process has reached its end, conferring upon her a counseling record, the description reading, "It's over. No matter what's been written on here, it's only farewell." You can finally enter the shut door in the untuned area, placing Ray on a stage set of her bedroom. Giving this static ghost of Ray the paper airplane, a symbol of Ray's feelings of imprisonment, triggers this series of poems. A gleam cup of nauseating color. overflowing with the stench of human corruption. Plates and cups clash against the walls as father's voice roars through the halls. After a series of curses seething, all that's left is mother's weeping. Our family was once sweet together, healthy and caring when we gathered, and now, every night, a restless sleep, every morning, hearts awake. As it goes on, day by day, the anguish digs ever deep. I was shattered into countless pieces, mirroring the crumbling of a familiar world, in a state of ceaseless decay, plunging into a river of despair, floating in limbo for the rest of our days. Then, upon giving the pendant, the symbol of her forbidden love. Anticipating when we meet, footsteps ever quick and slight. Roaming through a neon forest, strolling past the dazzling lights, I've become a little lark. Brushing past the pretty flowers, chasing all the pretty butterflies, I glide merrily by your side. I've been an actor in our play, long before the curtain's risen. Being held is ever comforting, longing for your loving embrace. Listening to your many whispers, feeling each other's tranquil breathing, the white deer walked into my grasp. What a pleasant surprise. What a turn of fate. I want to keep this moment in my palm for eternity. Finally, the counseling record, the symbol of her relationship's end. All of a sudden, we stopped meeting. You became distant, bitterly, colder than the sun could melt, air around you freezing instantly, and my frozen body's beating heart, with each pulse tearing itself apart. Again, I'm left in abject solitude, a house that I call home, a space that I call school, a walking corpse whose mind is without, a sense of loss that's drowned with doubt. Wow, what can I even say? Such a powerful scene, and a tragically beautiful summary of the whole chapter. This chapter is my favorite in the game because of how it humanizes Ray. Many horror games like Detention, where your character is placed in a purgatory after they've done some bad thing and have to find out what it is, don't really care to go beyond that. But what makes this game so special is how Ray is an actual sympathetic character. Ray is a product of her environment in every sense of the term. She was raised in a dysfunctional household with an abusive, infidel father and a cold and reclusive mother. She grew up in a harsh and oppressive society that punished unique thinkers. She went to a school that she felt outcast by, and for her troubles, she was taken advantage of by predatory adults and scapegoated by her peers. After this, a disembodied door appears on stage. Interacting with it triggers a cutscene that shows an overheard conversation between Miss Yin and Mr. Cheng, wherein Miss Yin berates him for his relationship with Ray and warns that it would jeopardize the Forbidden Book Club. We are then shown that Miss Yin was evidently correct. In a cutscene similar to the one from the very beginning of the game, now from Ray's perspective, we see Ray clench her fists towards Miss Yin, before cutting to her watching students be escorted to deportation vans, before finally showing the face of Mr. Cheng. Ray's hands become stained with blood as Mr. Cheng's face is marked with lacerations, which, as I mentioned before, was a method of torture used in internment camps. A burlap bag then appears over his head, and we're treated to Ray's closing chapter thoughts. A painful recollection. My soul is shattered into pieces. When I cannot put myself back together and forget everything, I open my eyes to a barren world. End Chapter 3. So, if it's not quite clear to you, Ray, believing that Miss Yin and Mr. Cheng had something more going on, took a page out of her mother's book and ratted out the Communist Book Club. Then Mr. Cheng was incidentally arrested as well, which, kinda defeats the purpose. The beginning of Chapter 4 starts with showing us an older man on a derelict and rundown version of the auditorium stage where Ray was at the very beginning of the game. Ray then fades into view and becomes playable, where she can enter the supply closet to find a dark silhouette of herself. The silhouette says the following: "Our life would vanish, but not our guilt. I am you, yet you are not me. It's the sin that makes you linger in this realm. Memories like mirrors reflecting the true likeness of your soul. In a world full of pain and suffering, Fang Ration, what do you fear the most?" The options are losing family, losing my life, and losing myself. This is the first of a series of questions that basically test your knowledge of Ray's character. This one is fairly easy. Throughout all of the game, Ray's explicit desire is to be able to be her own person, free from the constraints placed on her by the authoritarian government and her dysfunctional home life. Both times we see her seek guidance from the heavens, she prays to be able to live as herself, and she feels like an outcast. The lone daffodil, who feels excluded from her peers and ostracized by the culture she lives in. Perhaps Ray did join the reading club with good faith intentions, wanting to break free from her social confines, but of course it turned into a force for bad when once again she felt abandoned. Selecting the right answer merits the response: belief that we are all born free. Eager to walk in your own path and afraid of losing yourself? You are me. The room then fades into a ghostly glowing version of itself, and Ray switches places with her reflection. You can now explore the mirror world, leading to this chasm where you can swap with another shimmering silhouette. This introduces the main puzzle mechanic of this chapter, which allows you to control Ray's shadow. Also, I didn't mention it before, but Ray is now slightly translucent, the physical world, which seems to indicate that she's a ghost. This tells me that the White Mirror world is the spirit realm, where Rey's spirit wanders the corporeal plane and she relives the past, and the more realistic world is the real physical realm that she's trapped in. The next encounter is across this gap, where the shadow describes Rey's former passion and enthusiasm before her life began to fall apart. Remember when you enrolled, so full of passion, participating in every school activity, showing off your academic abilities, grabbing the attention of your peers and teachers. Then, things took a turn for the worse. All the attention quickly turned into unwanted scrutiny. So you chose. The correct answer here is to escape. I'm not entirely sure on what this means, but based on her response, I think it means that she chose to escape by joining the book club and opening her mind. The world is immeasurably vast. There's always a place to hide. You are me. There's a whole world out there, and to break free from the confines of society, Rey wants to learn more about it. Think of things like the paper plane of her dreams or the map in her classroom. Exiting the door flashes the message on screen, "This place is lifeless. Even ideas are buried here," before showing a scene of two schoolboys in front of a campfire, one of whom appears to be Wei. It becomes evident that they're burning away evidence of the book club as the authorities are onto them, and here we also learn that Miss Yin managed to flee the country overnight. Why we see her die in this scene, I believe, is because of Rey's guilt. She didn't know what became of Miss Yin and assumed she was also arrested. The first boy asks if Wei knows about how the reading list was leaked, and Wei brushes it off and doesn't answer, because he does know how it happened. In their wake is left a court verdict, where it is confirmed that Mr. Cheng was sentenced to death. Meanwhile, Wei managed to get away with 15 years of prison. Again, I believe the reason that Rey was shown so much imagery of Wei dying was a result of her conscience weighing on her. She didn't know what actually happened, but assumed he too was given capital punishment. We're then shown another memory, this time of the book club meeting. Miss Yin is shown instructing the students and reminding them to keep the club top secret, before asking Wei if he knows about the incoming book imports. We learned that Mr. Chang was the supplier of the reading material, which recontextualizes the conversation Rey heard before. They were talking about the book club, not a potential relationship of theirs, which makes her concerns all the more founded because she could literally be killed. After this encounter, you can find a scrap of newspaper that tells us more about what happened to Miss Yin after the book club was caught. Apparently, she traveled the world advocating for education, human rights, and freedom of expression, and, in the aftermath of the lifting of martial law, her funeral was held in her hometown. Good for her, honestly. Miss Yin is a queen. I'm glad she managed to live a short but fulfilling life. You can continue down the school and enter a bathroom stall barred with a broom and denoted with the word snitcher, leading to a warped hallway with the music room at the end. Here you can find the older man playing the melody that was required to solve the puzzle before. Interacting with him causes you to be transported to the spirit world again, leaving behind a note that seems to be a journal excerpt. The entry tells us about a her who quietly took her own life without a last word, and then the author emerging from a time of captivity. Yeah, so if it's not clear yet, Rey took her own life after realizing what she had done. The older man is Wei in the present day after serving his jail time, coming back to the scene of all that happened so long ago. At the next encounter with the Shadow, she says the following: acting immediately on one's determination, this is the philosophy he believed in, that someone should take fate in their own hands. With you following him, what ideas do you hold? This one's also fairly straightforward. The answer is take hold of your destiny, which is essentially just another way to take fate in your hands. That is a charming thought. So life has gained a goal. Next to him, you found yourself. You are me. Next is another memory, prefaced by, no matter how many times this replays, nothing can be unwound. You can never redeem yourself. A conversation between Rey and Instructor Bai is then shown, wherein she hands over the reading list. Instructor Bai fades away and you can then interact with Shadow Rey. Did you think finding something to rely on would stave off your fear? One day, however, he was gone, just like that. You've lost everything you can depend on. What choice will you make now? The answer to this one is weird to me. To get the good ending, you must pick try to take them back, but that isn't really right to me. There are some things you can't take back, and Rey got people killed. Regardless, she did try to take them back as she committed suicide. I would pick quietly accept, if not for the quietly part. I'm not sure about this one, and it might be a translation issue as well, since try to take them back isn't super clear to me anyway. Hi, editing me here, and I've read a couple interpretations, including ones from native Chinese speakers, and this choice makes more sense to me now. This isn't about Rey trying to right her wrongs, it's about Rey trying to get Mr. Chang back. She didn't choose to quietly accept that there were other fish in the sea and that he was creepy anyway. She tried to take him back by ratting out Miss Yin in the book club. I think the main thing that confused me was the use of them rather than him. Anyway, yeah, it's not weird, I just misinterpreted it. Regardless, for the sake of understanding the full story, I want to explain the bad ending first. Continuing to the roof, you can find Wei pensively smoking off the balcony before re-entering the spirit world. You then encounter Shadow Rey again, who admonishes you for choosing not to come to terms with what Rey did. The hall fades away and Rey is transported to a blood-red field, bodies scattered across the background. The music becomes jittery and eerie as Rey faces a stage of people who she hurt. They say, constantly cycling over and over with only the river Sanzu at the end of your journey, yet the knot of sin still lies unsolved. The bridge leading to Paramita, the Buddhist term for a state of perfection, in collapse. So the Requiem, with a warm crescendo, welcomes you once again. Entering the auditorium, Rei steps onto a stage with an applauding audience before her. A scratchy silhouette presents her with the noose, titled Sin. Life ends, but sin is permanent. In silence, I await my curtain call. The audience fades away and a single chair is placed before her. You can then use the noose and the game slowly draws to a close, as the cycle begins anew. So, was that literal? I think it was. Based on the jump scare in the music room and the phone call in the office, Rei did actually receive some kind of medal or reward for being a hero of the state and turning in her peers to the communist police. And I suspect that this, along with the bullying that she evidently suffered as a result, see the bathroom hallway, was the thing that ultimately pushed her to take her own life. The theme that plays during this scene is entitled Cycle of Samsara. In Buddhism, samsara is the cycle of death, suffering, and rebirth that we as humans experience until we finally reach that stage of paramita. So here, Rei remains, trapped in a cycle of guilt and suffering until she can finally confront herself and come to terms with what she did. But that's a real downer ending, and if you do answer all of the questions correctly, can the samsara be broken? Perhaps. If you do answer everything correctly and you accept what you did, rather than the shadow, you'll find a yellowed paper plane. Its description reads, "From the white deer to the white daffodil. Fate holds us apart, so let us greet again in another life. To our freedom." Continuing on, rather than the next landing is an office door, which can be surmised as Mr. Chang's office. Interacting with the door shows dialogue from presumably an officer arresting him for facilitating the spread of forbidden teachings. Rei then speaks to Mr. Chang for the final time. He laments the cruel nature of their culture and how humanity deserves to live freely, before he and the room fade into nothingness. This heartbreaking scene is accompanied by a beautiful track featuring these gorgeous vocals, and I can hardly listen to it without crying. Finally, we hear Rei's voice for the first and final time, saying,
白水先染上一河鲜血，只能如铁锈般凋零。
So if that wasn't thoroughly depressing enough as it was, we then play through the epilogue, wherein we take on the role of Wei. In his journal are various mementos from his time after high school, a certificate of amnesty, a journal entry, a letter from his father about his mother's passing, and the court verdict. Again, the subtle storytelling. Just so good! These little details do so well at humanizing Wei since, though I have expressed my thought on Rei's nuances, people still suffered because of her, including literal children. You continue up the hill and encounter the old lady in the initial death, who utters some cryptic words about Rei's samsara. Entering the schoolyard shows that the banyan tree has been cut down, symbolizing the end of Rei's eternal damnation. When you enter the school, it's withered and covered in vandalism. Wei remarks that this is often a teenage hangout nowadays. To me, this is meant to show how much we tend to take history for granted. These people who didn't live through martial law don't take it seriously and just treat it as some old building, but it's so much more for Wei. Countless lives were destroyed at this school, and the course of history was changed, and to me that's one of the main takeaways of Detention. History is often just statistics to us, and while we cognitively know that certain things are bad, we don't really think of them as bad because of some personal attachment. But when you put it in the perspective of an individual, it becomes a whole lot more impactful. I can say that 140,000 people were arrested by the KMT during martial law, sure. Or I can say that 140,000 daughters, sons, sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, teachers, lovers, individuals were affected by the White Terror. And that's how you really send a message. Finally, Wei goes back to the classroom where he invited Rei to the book club so long ago. He takes his seat at his old desk, and across from him appears the ghostly figure of Fang Rei Shin. As the credits roll, accompanied by this gorgeous track, Left Alone, Detention draws to a close. I'm just gonna be quiet and let the credits play for a moment so we can soak in everything. So there you have it. Detention, a title that refers not to school detention, but rather not only the detention that Rei caused her classmates and teachers, but also her own personal detention, the samsara she must cycle through until she can finally come to terms with what she did. Honestly, I don't have a ton of closing thoughts that I didn't already express except just to play the game. It's short, it's affordable, it's available on most platforms, you'll be supporting an independent studio, and most importantly, it's just an incredible game. You have no good reason not to play it. Well done, Red Candle Games, you have made what is with no exaggeration a masterpiece. Red Candle has published one other game so far, Devotion. It's another horror game that draws on Taiwanese culture and is also absolutely brilliant. I don't think it quite tops Detention, but it's still amazing. If Detention piqued your interest, I'd highly recommend checking it out. Unfortunately, you'll have to rely on Let's Plays or other less legal means to access it, because Big Papa China has slapped it off of storefronts, which is really disappointing. I hate pirating games from indie developers, but this one left me with no choice. So in wake of being unable to offer your finances to Devotion, you can support Red Candle by buying Detention or funding their upcoming project, 9 Souls. Yes, Red Candle has a game in the works that is set to come out in the coming months called 9 Souls. It's not a horror game, but instead is a platformer based on cyberpunk and Taoist aesthetics, which is a combination I never knew I needed. The game looks incredible so far. The art direction is very visually striking, with the game being entirely hand-drawn, the music is as fantastic as ever, and the gameplay feels very snappy and satisfying. Given Red Candle's track record, I have high hopes for it, and given that its estimated release date is coming soon, I can't wait to see how it pans out. So go wishlist it, and play the demo. It's on Steam right now, and I want to see Red Candle get as much support as they can. But with all of that being said, that's the end of this video. As usual, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. It means so much to me that you care enough about my inane ramblings to listen to me for almost an hour. If you liked the video, it would mean the world if you liked and commented, or maybe even subscribed if you're feeling particularly frisky. Again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye-bye!